An account of those who suffered in the 11th century. Summary of the martyrs in the 11th century. 14 persons, the chiefest of whom was called Stephen, are burned as heretics, for the testimony of the truth, by the papists, A.D. 1022, at Orleans in France. Then follows a note concerning the accusations brought against the aforementioned persons, and also, further observations touching said 14 martyrs, according to the accounts of various papistic and other writers. The great craftiness of the papist, Gretserus, in altering the titles of the books of the ancients, to the detriment of the belief of the Waldenses, some of their martyrs called firstlings, which is circumstantially noticed in the margin. Some pious Christians at Goslar, called Manicheans by the papists, hanged for the confession of the truth, A.D. 1052. It is shown, 1. That they claimed to lead a true apostolical life, 2. That they would neither lie nor swear, 3. That they maintained that the sacrament of the altar was nothing but bread, 4. That they denied baptism, that is, infant baptism. One papist, as Thuan against Radulf, etc., opposed to each other in their testimony against these people. Henry and Alfward, 2 good Christians, the former beheaded in the uttermost parts of Sweden, the latter slain among the Normans, for defending the true doctrine, A.D. 1067. 14 persons, the chiefest of whom was called Stephen, burned as heretics for the testimony of the truth, by the papists, at Orleans, in France, near the close of A.D. 1022. A.D. 1022, near the close of the year, it seems, or, at the latest, A.D. 1023, there were apprehended and publicly burned, in France, in the presence of King Robert, on account of heresy, so called by the papists, certain 14 persons, some of whom were common people, while the others were of noble descent, and of whom the chiefest was called Stephen. They were accused of having spoken evil of God, and the holy sacraments, that is, of holy baptism, namely, infant baptism, for this was what the papists generally practiced, and concerning which disputes were of frequent occurrence, and of the body and blood of the Lord, that is, the sacrament of the altar, which the Romanists were wont to call the body and blood of the Lord, also of marriage, etc. This appears, says the writer, to have been the first execution, that is, by burning, of persons accused of heresy in the Roman Church. Continuing, he says, in an old book we find an account that this heresy was brought into this country from across the sea, namely, from Bulgaria, and that thence it was spread into other provinces, where it subsequently was much in vogue, principally in Languedoc, around Toulouse, and in Gascony. He also states there, that the people who maintained this doctrine, were called Albigeois, and also Bulgarians, because they came from Bulgaria. Then it will be seen, that they believed and spoke nothing but what we at the present day believe and speak, also, as regards baptism, that they baptized believers, and opposed infant baptism, and, touching the supper, that they observed it according to the institution of Christ, but rejected the Mass and transubstantiation, again, that they denied revenge, the swearing of oaths, auricular confession, the invocation of departed saints, purgatory, etc. Further observations touching said 14 martyrs, according to the accounts of various papistic and other writers, noted in A. Mellinus, Second Book of the Persecutions. This testimony is confirmed by Johannes, a monk of Floriax, who gives a somewhat fuller account of the matter, in his letter to Oliva or Olivarius, abbot of the Church of Ancona, saying, Meanwhile I will inform thee of this heresy. Thus he calls the true faith of these people, which was on Innocents' Day, in the city of Orleans, for it is the truth if thou hast heard aught of it. King Robert caused 14 of the best or most nobly born laymen of said city to be burned alive, who, oh, what a great falsehood! Abominable before God, and hated by heaven and earth, utterly denied the grace of holy baptism, he means infant baptism, for thereupon the grace of salvation was promised to children, which these men denied, as well as the consecration of the body and blood of the Lord, and denied that one could thereby obtain remission of sins, after he had committed a crime. Glaber Radulfus gives a much more circumstantial account of these martyrs, relating not only how this so-called heresy was discovered, but also how it was brought to Orleans and propagated, which we, in order to be brief, pass by. He mentions, among others, 2 of these people by name, namely, Aribert and Lysias, who were greatly esteemed and beloved by the king and the lords of the realm, as long as their case was not known. Glaber further relates how they were discovered. They sought, at Rouen, to bring a certain priest over to their belief through some whom they probably had expressly sent to this priest, to expound to him the mystery of their doctrine, and who endeavored to persuade him by saying that very soon all the people would fall over to them. When the priest understood this, he immediately went to Richard, the count of that city, and told him the whole matter. The latter instantly sent letters by express messengers to the king, informing him of this secret pestilence, as he calls the true faith. King Robert, much grieved at this, without delay convened a council of many bishops, abbots, and other religious persons, and, through them, caused very strict investigations to be made, both as to the authors and adherents of said heresy. When inquiry was made among the laymen, as to what the belief and faith of each several one was, and others declared that they adhered to Aribert and Lysias, and that they could in no wise be drawn away from their faith. Being interrogated more closely, whence and by whom this presumption had originated, they gave this answer: this is what you have long called a sect, which you now, though late, recognize. But we have waited for a long time, that you as well as all others, of whatever law or order, might come over and unite with this sect, which, we also believe, will yet take place. They then immediately presented their belief, undoubtedly after the manner of the Albigenses and Waldenses, as shall be shown hereafter. When the king and all those present saw that they could not be moved from their belief, he commanded that a very large fire of wood should be kindled not far from the city, in order that perhaps, terrified thereby, they might desist from their belief. But when they were about to be led out to the fire, they cried aloud, saying, that they greatly longed for it, and gave themselves into the hands of those who were to draw them to the fire. They, 13 in number, were committed to the flames, and all who afterwards were found to be their adherents, were put to death by the same means. Again, in the records of the parish church of Orleans, called St. Maximus Church, the time is specified, when this took place. It occurred, it is there stated, publicly at Orleans, A. D. 1022, in the 28th year of King Robert, on the 5th induction, when the arch-heretic Stephen and his companions were condemned at Orleans, and burnt. The above citations are taken from the writings of papists, hence, the reader is admonished to judge charitably with regard to the accusations which these inveterate adversaries have so bitterly cast up against these pious witnesses of Jesus Christ. Note, we have related above, that said 14 martyrs have been considered, by the ancients, as the Waldenses, but the papists called them heretics. However, this is not to be wondered at, since, in the course of time, they adopted the practice of calling heretics and the Waldenses by the same name. Of this we will present a few examples. The priest Reinarius wrote a book, which he called Summa contra Hereticos, that is, a summary against the heretics. To this book the Jesuits subsequently gave the title Contra Waldenses, or, Against the Waldenses, as if all the errors opposed in said book, were peculiar to the Waldenses, which is as untrue as falsehood itself. Everhard Berthuniensis gave to his book the title, Anti-Heretism, which is equivalent to saying against heretics, etc., but the Jesuit Gretserus, when he published said book, called it, Everhardus contra Waldensen, as if Everhard had written only against the Waldenses, notwithstanding only the smallest part militates against them. Nevertheless, it was sought by this title, to accuse the Waldenses of all the heresies mentioned in that book. Afterwards, Wunner Megard wrote a book against the grossly erring spirits who maintained in their confession, that the world and all visible things were not created by God, but, oh, what an awful falsehood! By Satan, which belief is imputed, by most of the ancient writers, to the Manicheans, yet the last mentioned falsifier, namely, Gretserus, has not hesitated to head such a page of said book, or Megard against the Waldenses, though the author specially refuted the Manicheans, with whom the Waldenses had nothing in common. See the above mentioned authors and books, and also the comments of Balthasar Lydius on the disputations of said persons. Hence it follows from the foregoing, that it need not seem strange to the reader, that the papists called the Waldenses, or, at least, such as opposed the Roman doctrine, as well as the priests and monks, by the odious name of Manicheans are heretics, as was frequently the case, and shall presently be shown, with regard to the good martyrs, who, through the malice of the papists were hanged at Goslar. Some pious Christians, called Manicheans and heretics by the papists, hanged for the confession of the truth, at Goslar, A.D. 1052. It grieves us that in regard to the testimonies of the holy martyrs, we have to resort to the writings of papists, their most inveterate enemies, as well as to other writers who did not hold the same faith with us, and who, consequently, made the records of the pious witnesses of Jesus our Savior incline to their opinion, and explained them according to their own views. This mischief has met us before, and now again falls to our lot still. We hope that the intelligent and attentive reader will distinguish light from darkness, and judge impartially, and as a Christian. Hermann Contractus, Count of Veringen, writes at the close of his life, hardly 1 or 2 years before his death, of certain persons at Goslar, who were accused by their adversaries, the Romanists, of being Manicheans, for at that time no other or better name was known for the true Christians, who were opposed to the Roman Church, notwithstanding they had nothing at all in common with the Manicheans, and thus this Hermann Contractus, a strong maintainer of the papal religion, also called these persons, after Roman fashion, Manicheans, saying, the Emperor Henry III, some say to, A. d. 1052, celebrated, at Goslar, the Lord's birthday, and there caused some heretics, thus he calls the true Christians, who, among other perverse opinions according to the sect of the Manichaeans, abhor the eating of all kinds of meat, which he unjustly imputes to these people, as shall be shown, and who were condemned, by common consent, of the bishops or lords of the realm, as heretics, to be hanged on the gallows, in order that the contagion should not spread further and contaminate many others. But they cared not so much, Melanus writers, about the eating of flesh, as about many other points of doctrine, which Hermann Contractus passes over silently, namely, such as Radulfardens makes mention of, relating that at the close of said century there were some, so-called, Manichaeans at Aix-la-Chapelle in France. He there says, such are at the present day the Manichaean heretics, who have polluted our country of Aix-la-Chapelle with their heresy, who pretend to lead a true apostolical life, saying that they do not lie, that they do not swear, and, under the cloak of abstemiousness, they reject the eating of flesh. They also maintain that the sacrament of the altar is nothing but mere bread. They deny baptism, namely, infant baptism, for this was the point in question, and say that none can be saved but those who are baptized by their hands. It is true that said papistic writer charges them with several other things as belonging to their doctrines, of which we deem it unnecessary to speak here, since Melanus, to whom we referred above, answers all these for us, saying, all these errors, except that of baptism and of the Mass are transubstantiation, that is, against the Mass and transubstantiation, are unjustly imputed to them by these papistic authors, as Thuan, writing of the Waldenses, himself confesses. He then quotes from Thuan the confession of these people, in which no errors at all, much less Manichaean heresies, are found, but which contains chiefly such things as are publicly taught by us, at the present day, and maintained with the power and authority of the holy and divine scriptures, against the superstitions of popery. Having quoted the confession of these people, from Thuan, Melanus says, this is certainly a square and unfeigned confession of Thuan, which alone is sufficient to refute all the preceding slanders, namely, which had been flung against the holy martyrs. Thus, even according to the testimony of the papist Thuan, and the statement of the Calvinistic Melanus, the above-mentioned martyrs were not guilty of Manichaean errors, they only spoke against the Roman Church, principally in the matter of baptism, that is, infant baptism, and in regard to the Mass or transubstantiation, hence, they may be reckoned among the true witnesses of Jesus Christ. Note, we here place one papist against another, Thuan against Radulf. In the meantime, we are induced to receive the best testimony concerning said martyrs from these two differing writers, since they both had no other purpose than to speak to the detriment of said people. Thuan says, their points of doctrine are said to be these, that the Roman Church has forsaken the true Christian faith, that she is the Babylonian whore, and the dead tree which Christ cursed and commanded to be cut down, that therefore no obedience is to be rendered to the Pope and the bishops who consent to his errors. That monachism is a veritable sink of all the corruption of the Church, and an infernal pool, that all monastic vows are vain and unavailing, and tend only to lasciviousness, that the orders of the priesthood are marks of the great beast, of which mention is made in the Apocalypse, that purgatory, the Mass, church consecration, the worship of saints, masses for the dead, etc., are genuine inventions and institutions of Satan. These, says the writer, are the principal and certain articles of their doctrine. The others, concerning marriage, that they deemed it evil, the resurrection, that they denied it, the state of the soul after death, that they spoke improperly of it, and concerning meats, that they rejected all eating of flesh, are unjustly imputed to them. We have shown this the more circumstantially, to demonstrate the innocence of said martyrs, and that their doctrinal points were not Manichaean heresies, but strictures upon the Roman Church, which stirred up the animosity of the papists, so that, as it seems, they vented the spleen of their manifold accusations against said people. Henry and Alfuard, two pious Christians, the one beheaded in the uttermost parts of Sweden, the other slain among the Normans, for defending the true doctrine. A.D. 1067. A.D. 1067, there was a God-fearing man, whose name was Henry, and whom the Romish historian calls a stranger, perhaps because he was obliged to live secretly or as a stranger among the Romanists. It is stated of him, that he preached the gospel of Christ in the uttermost parts of Sweden, and that he was apprehended for this cause and beheaded for the name of Christ. Another pious Christian, named Alfuard, after living for a long time secretly, yet leading a pure and holy life among the Normans, could not thus even in secret remain Christ's own. Because he sought to protect, or to do good to, his enemy, he was slain by his friends, or those at least who ought to have been his friends. The records of these two martyrs, Henry and Alfuard, are very brief, because, the writer, as he states, would neither add to, nor take from, the truth of the matter, but wished to record it just as it was stated to him, which is an evidence of the verity of said matter. Therefore we also did not feel at liberty to extend the relation of the same, or to add, for amplification, the opinions of other authors. However, this is not necessary, since, in said account, all that is needful for the cognizance of said martyrs, is briefly, yet sufficiently, shown. For, of Henry it is stated that he preached the gospel of Christ, not papal traditions, and that he was apprehended on this account. Of Alford the author writes, that he lived for a long time secretly, though leading a pure and holy life, among the Normans, also, that he could no longer secretly remain Christ's own, understand, not the Pope's, or the so-called Mother, the Roman Church's own, but Christ's own. More might be added, but for the well-disposed we deem this sufficient.